Rain fell hard on the roof of the scrapyard, the sound like 1,000 tiny hammers tapping on rusted metal. Jack was used to it. Storms came often here, but tonight there was something different in the air, a strange feeling that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He was about to close up his small workshop when he heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain, it was faint. So faint that at first he thought he imagined it. A small pulsing noise, almost like a weak electronic heartbeat. Jack frowned and grabbed his flashlight, stepping out into the cold night. The yard was a maze of broken ships, metal scraps, and discarded machines, each one stacked high like walls of an abandoned city. The rain made the ground slippery, but he followed the sound, his boots splashing in puddles. The pulse grew a little louder, slow and irregular, like it was fading. He turned a corner between two piles of wreckage and stopped. There, lying half-buried in the mud, was something that made him forget the cold, forget the storm. At first, he thought it was just a broken machine. But then the dim glow of two large eyes blinked weakly at him. It was a girl, at least, part of one. Her body wasn't whole. Her chest plate was cracked open. Her arms and legs were gone. Wires hung where limbs should have been. Sparks hissed. As the rain touched exposed circuits, her skin was pale, smooth, almost like porcelain, but lined with seams where flesh met metal. Jack crouched down slowly, shining his light over her. She was small, maybe barely a teenager in human years, but alien her features were different. Her face narrow, her ears pointed slightly back. Her eyes far larger than human eyes, glowing faint blue through the rain. She looked so fragile, so close to shutting down. Her mouth opened, and the sound that came out wasn't natural speech. It was a mix of static and broken words, like a damaged speaker trying to work. "Help me." The voice was so weak Jack had to lean close to hear it over the storm. He hesitated. Part of him knew it would be smarter to walk away. The galaxy wasn't kind to people who helped strangers, especially alien strangers. But another part of him couldn't move. She tried to lift what was left of her arm, just a shoulder joint and some wires, but it collapsed in the mud. Her eyes dimmed a little more. He realized she was running out of power, running out of time. Jack's mind raced. He knew she couldn't survive long like this, not in the rain, not with her systems failing. He could try to contact the nearest medbay. But even as the thought came, he remembered how they treated aliens here, especially ones who were damaged. They'd see her as scrap, not as someone worth saving. He glanced around the shadows of the yard, half expecting to see someone watching. But there was nothing, only the rain and the piles of broken ships. He made his choice in that moment, a decision that felt heavier than the storm around him. Jack slid his arms under her fragile frame. Feeling the cold weight of her damaged body, she was lighter than he expected. Maybe because so much of her was missing. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel the faint vibration of her. Flickering core, she made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and her eyes closed halfway. As he carried her through the maze of scrap, the rain poured harder, soaking his jacket. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly lighting up the yard in sharp white light. He stepped over old cables and rusted panels, careful not to trip. Each second mattered. Finally, he reached the workshop, kicking the door open with his foot. The warm glow from inside spilled over them. He set her down gently on the repair table, water dripping from her hair and the edges of her cracked chest plate. Jack grabbed a clean cloth and began wiping away the mud from her face and exposed circuits. She was still breathing well, not breathing like a human. But small bursts of energy flickered inside her chest. He bent down so she could see his face. "Clearly, you're safe now," he said quietly, unsure if she even understood. Her eyes fluttered, and for a moment, he thought she might have lost consciousness entirely. But then they focused on him again. Glowing a little brighter in the warm light of the workshop, Jack felt something shift inside him. He had seen machines in worse shape. He had rebuilt engines from almost nothing, but this was different. This wasn't just a repair. This was a life hanging by a thread. And he knew if he didn't act fast, she'd be gone before morning. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, Jack was already pulling out tools, clearing the table of old projects. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what danger might follow her here, but he didn't care. In that moment, there was only one goal: keep her alive, no matter what it took. And deep down, a small voice in his head whispered that this was the night everything in his quiet life was about to change forever. Jack stood over the repair table, the storm still pounding outside. The alien girl's faint glow lit the room in a soft blue haze. He knew she needed help fast, but the damage was worse than anything he had seen before. His first thought was, the med bay in the nearest settlement. It was only a short ride away. He grabbed his comm and connected to their channel. A tired voice answered. Asking for his request, Jack explained quickly, saying he had found an injured alien and needed urgent repairs. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the voice grew cold. They asked for her species ID. Jack hesitated, but he gave it. The silence after that was even longer. When the voice returned, it was sharp. We do not treat that kind here. The call ended with a hard click. Jack stared at the comm in disbelief. Though he knew he shouldn't be surprised, this world had no pity for aliens, especially for ones from certain races. To them, she was nothing but a broken enemy machine, not a living being. They would rather let her fade than spend parts or power on her. He looked down at her again, her eyes half open, faint and tired. Rainwater still dripping from the edges of her hair. Her lips moved slightly, but no clear words came out. Her breath or the soft hum that passed, for it was uneven, weak. Jack felt his chest tighten. Leaving her here in this state would be the same as killing her himself. He thought about asking some of the other local mechanics for help, but he knew what they would say. They'd either laugh in his face or report him. And if word got out that he was hiding her, hunters would come, not to save her, but to strip her for valuable tech. Jack pushed the thought away and decided he would do it himself. He would fix her, even if it meant using the rare parts he had been saving for years, even if it meant trouble for him, moving quickly. He grabbed a thermal blanket from a storage shelf and wrapped it around her. Tucking it under her chin, she shivered slightly. Or maybe it was just her systems flickering. Either way, she seemed a little calmer with the warmth outside. He heard a sound that froze him, a distant thud, then another, footsteps. Slow but heavy, someone was in the yard. He put a hand on the light switch and turned off the overheads. The workshop fell into shadows. The only light now was the pale glow from her eyes. Jack walked silently to the small window and peeked out. Shapes moved between the piles of scrap, tall figures in dark gear, their movements careful and deliberate. Hunters. He knew the type. They could smell a trail, they could follow an energy signature across miles, and they always came in groups. His mind raced. They must have caught the faint signal from her damaged core. She was like a beacon to them, and the storm couldn't hide it forever. He needed to work fast, but also stay hidden. He went back to her side, speaking low. You're safe here, but we have to keep quiet. Her eyes shifted to his, and he saw something in them, not just fear, but resignation. Like she had already accepted that she wouldn't make it through the night. He hated that look. Her lips moved again, and this time, the words came clearer. Though broken, they'll tear you apart. Jack almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because she cared enough to warn him. He shook his head. Let them try, he said softly. More to himself than to her, he started clearing his main workbench, shoving aside old tools, and half-repaired drones. This would be his operating table now. He fetched his special toolkit from the locked cabinet, a set of instruments, so precise they could adjust the width of a hair. He had used them only a few times, and each time had been for something important. Her glow dimmed for a moment, and panic surged in his chest. He placed a hand gently over her chest plate. Feeling the faint, irregular pulse of her core, he could almost imagine it was a heartbeat, but weaker, so much weaker. Outside, the footsteps grew closer, crunching over wet metal and gravel. He heard the faint click of weapons being prepared. They were sweeping the yard, and sooner or later they would come to his door. Jack moved faster, running diagnostics on her with a small handheld scanner. The readings were bad core power at 12%, neural circuits damaged, communication system partially destroyed, and no limbs to assist mobility without intervention. She wouldn't last more than an hour, maybe less. He closed the scanner and leaned close to her face. "I'm not letting them take you," he whispered. "You're going to make it no matter what." A loud clang outside made him flinch. They were close now. Maybe only a few meters from the entrance. He grabbed a heavy wrench and placed it within reach. His eyes flicking between the door and her fragile form, he knew he couldn't fight them off forever. Not alone. But if he could keep her alive, there might be a way to escape later. For now, all that mattered was buying enough time to repair the parts of her that mattered most. In the dim workshop, the rain hammering against the roof, and the shadows of the hunters sliding closer, Jack began the work that would change both their lives forever. Jack's workshop was small, filled with shelves stacked with broken engines, half-repaired drones, and crates of old ship parts. The air smelled faintly of oil and warm metal. In the middle of it all, under the dim light of a single lantern, the alien girl lay on his main work table, wrapped in the thermal blanket. Her faint blue glow, the only thing breaking the shadows. He studied her carefully, every detail of her condition. Her chest plate was cracked almost in half. The exposed circuits inside were wet from the rain. Some wires were snapped completely, others were frayed. Small sparks jumped between broken connections. Her lower body was gone entirely. There was nothing from the waist down except a tangle of cables and the faint shimmer of a damaged stabilizer. Jack knew the truth. This wasn't going to be a simple repair. It would be a rebuild. He pulled over a tray of tools and began with the basics, drying her internal systems with a heat vent. His hands moved quickly but gently, wiping away the mud, removing small stones that had been lodged in the cracks. Each time he touched a wire, she flinched slightly, her eyes opening and closing as if she were fighting to stay awake. "You're going to be okay," Jack said quietly. Even though he wasn't entirely sure himself, he reached into a locked cabinet and brought out a box covered in dust. Inside were rare parts he had collected over the years, pieces from old alien tech, grade processors, energy cells no one else in town could afford. He had been saving them for his dream project, something that might have made him rich one day. But now, looking at her, he knew they had a new purpose. The first step was stabilizing her core. He removed the broken power lines and replaced them with reinforced cables from his stash. As soon as the connection clicked into place, her glow brightened just a little. A flicker of life, her eyes opened halfway. And for the first time, he thought he saw something like relief on her face. He kept working, connecting a temporary energy cell to give her more time. Then, starting on the neural interface, her kind didn't have a brain exactly, but a complex network of crystal-like nodes inside the head and chest. If those failed, nothing else mattered. His scanner showed several nodes had hairline fractures, meaning her memory and personality were at risk. As he worked, questions began to fill his mind. What had happened to her? Who had done this? It wasn't the kind of damage caused by an accident. It was too deliberate. The cuts to the wiring were clean, the removal of her limbs too precise. Someone had taken them. Someone had stripped her for parts like she was nothing more than a broken machine. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to focus. Anger wouldn't help her now, but it did make him more determined. He adjusted the microsolder tool and began repairing the damaged connections one by one. The work was slow, each wire thinner than a strand of hair. But he didn't rush. At one point, her lips moved, and he leaned closer. "Why are you helping me?" The voice was faint, static-filled, but clear enough. Jack paused for a moment before answering, because no one else will. It was the truth, simple as that. She was silent for a while, her gaze fixed on him as he worked. Then her eyes closed. Again, her systems falling into a low-energy state, Jack kept going, attaching a temporary control harness to replace her missing limbs. It would let her move a little once her power stabilized, though it wouldn't be strong enough for full mobility. The rain outside had slowed, but the danger hadn't passed. Jack could still hear faint movements in the yard. The hunters hadn't left. Maybe they were waiting for backup. Maybe they were hoping he would make the repairs for them so they could take her in better condition. The thought made him work. Faster, he finished sealing the last crack in her chest plate with a polymer coating, making it waterproof again, then secured the stabilizer plate under her torso. When he stepped back to look at her, she looked a little less broken, still fragile, but more whole than before. Jack knew this was only the beginning. He could repair her enough to survive. But full restoration would take days, maybe weeks. The parts he had wouldn't be enough for a complete rebuild. He would have to find more, and that meant leaving the safety of the workshop, something that would put both of them in danger. For now, all he could do was keep her stable, keep her hidden, and hope that the hunters outside didn't decide to break in before he was ready. He wiped sweat from his forehead, put down the tools, and whispered more to himself than to her. "You're not just going to make it. You're going to walk again." Her glow pulsed softly in the dark, and for a moment, Jack let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off. Hours passed slowly in the dim workshop. The storm outside had faded to a light drizzle. But Jack barely noticed. His focus was on the small figure lying on the table. Her glow was steadier now, the temporary power cell keeping her alive while he continued to work. Every so often, her eyes would open just enough to show she was still. With him, she began to speak more often. Though her voice was still broken by static, her words came in fragments, pieces of a story that made Jack's chest tighten. She told him her name Lyra. She told him she had been taken from her homeworld months ago, maybe longer. She wasn't even sure anymore. Her people were almost gone, scattered across the galaxy. And she was one of the last, the way she described it. She hadn't been wounded in battle. She had been captured, taken to some kind of research facility. They hadn't just damaged her. They had taken her apart piece by piece, stripping away her limbs, replacing parts of her systems with devices they could study, testing how far they could push her before she stopped functioning. She had escaped, only because the place was attacked by someone else. The explosion had torn the walls apart, and in the chaos, she had crawled out into the night. Jack listened quietly, his jaw tightening as the truth became clear. Someone had done this to her, on purpose. And not just any one-and organized group with resources and knowledge. People who saw her kind as tools to be used, not as living beings. The thought made his stomach turn. She paused for a while, as if the telling had drained what little strength she had. Then she whispered something that made his hands still. "If they find me, they will not just kill me. They will use what is left to make weapons." Her voice trembled. "They will kill more. Not just my people. Yours too." Jack understood now why the hunters outside were so determined. She wasn't just a prize to them. She was a key, a way to build something terrible, something that could hurt everyone. He reached over and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, "They're not going to get you," he said softly, his voice steady. "Not while I'm here." Her eyes met his, and for a moment there was no fear in them, only trust. Outside, the faint sound of boots crunching on gravel reached his ears again. The hunters were still there, moving slowly, probably scanning for any energy spikes. Jack dimmed the lantern and cut power to most of the workshop, letting the shadows take over. The only light now was the soft blue from Lyra's core. He went back to his work, repairing a small section of her neural link, each movement careful and precise. He could feel her watching him, her gaze steady, as if she was trying to memorize his face. Finally, she spoke again. "Why are you risking this? You don't know me." Jack didn't stop working. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you don't deserve what happened to you, and I know you deserve a chance to live." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of his tools. Then Lyra's eyes softened, and she whispered, "No one has ever said that to me." Her words were almost too soft to hear. Jack finished reconnecting the neural pathways and checked the readings. The improvements were small but promising. Her responses were faster now, her energy core holding stable at 15%. He didn't have the full set of parts she needed yet, but she was no longer fading in front of him. That was enough for now. The danger, however, was far from over. He knew the hunters wouldn't wait forever. Sooner or later, they would decide to break down the door. He also knew that if Lyra's story was true, there might be others out there, like her others, who needed help but wouldn't get it. But that was a thought for another day. For now, the only thing that mattered was keeping her hidden, keeping her alive, and making sure no one could take her again. Jack stepped back from the table and looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't just a damaged alien anymore. She was someone who had survived things most people couldn't even imagine. Someone who still had the will to keep going, despite everything. And he knew one more thing helping her wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the only thing he could do. Because walking away now would mean letting the people who hurt her win. And that was something Jack could never live with. Lyra closed her eyes again. But not in weakness this time. More like she could finally rest. Jack stayed by her side, tools in hand, ready for whatever came next. The rain outside had stopped completely now. But in Jack's mind, the storm was just beginning. The night felt heavier now, the air inside the workshop thick with tension. Jack could still hear the faint movements outside, the sound of boots shifting on wet gravel, the quiet metal creak of someone brushing against the scrap piles. They were close, too close. Every few seconds, there was a pause. The kind of silence that meant they were listening, scanning, hunting. Jack kept his tools on the table but didn't make a sound. His eyes flicked to Lyra. Her glow dimmed a little, as if she knew what was happening. Her breathing, if it could be called that, was shallow, quiet. She didn't move at all. He stepped quietly to the window, moving just enough to peek through a narrow gap in the curtain. 3 shadows moved between the piles of broken machines. Tall and lean, wearing dark armor that glinted under the weak moonlight. Their helmets were smooth, no visible eyes, just a single red line glowing where a visor might be. Each carried a weapon slung across their back, and something in their hands that looked like a scanner. Jack's stomach sank. They were searching for her signal. He had already cut most of the workshop's power, but her core still emitted a faint energy pulse. Even with the stabilizer plate he'd fitted, there was no way to hide it completely. He pulled away from the window and went to her side, speaking in a low whisper, "We need to be silent." No sound, no movement. Her eyes met his, and she nodded weakly, though he could see fear there. Not just fear for herself, but for him too. The sound outside changed. The steps were heavier now, slower, deliberate. They were approaching the workshop. Jack glanced at the door. The lock was strong, reinforced steel, but against their weapons, it wouldn't hold for long. He had to be ready. He scanned the room quickly, noting every tool, every piece of scrap metal, every possible thing he could use to defend them. His hand rested briefly on the heavy plasma wrench lying on the bench. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but in the right hands, it could break through even hardened armor. Outside, a low voice spoke, muffled through the walls. He couldn't hear the words, but the tone was confident, as if they already believed their prey was inside. Another voice responded, and then came the sound of metal boots on the workshop's small porch. Lyra's faint voice came then, barely above a whisper. "If they get inside, run, don't fight." Them. Jack turned to her sharply. "Not happening," he said, his tone firm. "I'm not leaving you." She shook her head slightly. "You don't understand. They'll tear you apart." Her voice cracked. Jack crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "Maybe, but they'll have to get through me first." There was no fear in his voice, only determination. A loud bang shook the door. The hunters were testing it. Another bang followed, harder this time. Dust fell from the ceiling with a force. Jack moved quickly, shutting off the last of the workshop's lights and plunging the room into almost complete darkness. Only Lyra's blue glow remained, faint but steady. He stood beside the table, wrench in hand, listening to the hunters outside. They were talking. Again, their voices low but urgent now. A third bang rattled the door. This time, the hinges groaned. One more like that, and they'd be inside. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't take all three head-on. Not with their gear, but maybe if he could buy enough time for Lyra's systems to stabilize, they could find a way to slip out. He remembered the back wall of the workshop had an old maintenance hatch, small, but big enough for her if he carried her. He leaned close to her again. "If I tell you to hold on, you hold on tight, understand?" She looked confused, but nodded slowly. The fourth hit came, this time followed by a sharp hiss of air. The lock mechanism was being burned through. They weren't trying to break the door anymore. They were cutting it open. The smell of hot metal began to drift into the room. Jack's grip on the wrench tightened, his pulse steady, but his muscles ready. His eyes flicked between the door and the maintenance hatch on the far wall. In the dim light, he could see the thin line of red from the cutting tool moving around the lock. Lyra's voice came again, softer this time, almost a plea. "You can still run. You can leave now." Jack didn't look at her, not a chance. The final piece of the lock gave way with a loud metallic snap. The door creaked, then slowly swung inward. The shapes of the hunters filled the doorway, tall, armored, and silent, their red visors glowing faintly as they stepped inside. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick. Every sound amplified, the drip of water from the ceiling, the faint hum of Lyra's core, the creak of the hunters' boots as they spread out across the workshop floor. Jack took a slow step forward, placing himself between them and the table, the plasma wrench resting easily in his grip. He didn't speak, didn't taunt, just stared them down, his body language clear. If they wanted her, they'd have to go through him. The hunter in the lead tilted his head slightly, as if studying him, then took another step forward. Jack adjusted his stance, ready for whatever came next. The storm outside might have ended, but the real fight was about to begin. The air inside the workshop felt like it had stopped moving. The smell of wet metal and burned lock filled the space. The three hunters stepped fully inside, their black armor swallowing most of the light. Only the faint red glow from their visors and the soft blue light from Lyra's core cut through the shadows. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their slow, deliberate movements told Jack they were confident, too confident. Jack's grip tightened around the plasma wrench, his mind working fast. He couldn't fight them head-on for long. But maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he just needed to buy a little time. Enough for Lyra to get one last repair that might make the difference between life and death. The lead hunter moved toward the table, the red line of his visor fixed on Lyra. She lay completely still, her eyes half closed. But Jack could see the small rise and fall of her breathing. She wasn't unconscious, she was waiting. Maybe even listening for his voice. Jack stepped to the side, blocking the path. "She's not yours," he said quietly, his voice steady. The hunter didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached out with a gloved hand, as if to shove Jack aside. Jack swung the plasma wrench, the tool humming as it connected with the hunter's arm. Sparks flew. The hunter staggered back a step, surprised but not hurt badly. The other two hunters moved in fast, one going for Jack, the other circling toward the table. Jack's heart pounded. He swung again, forcing the second hunter to step back, but the third was already reaching for Lyra. That was when Jack made the choice. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the temporary power conduit connected to her chest and twisted it. A bright surge of energy lit the room for a split second. Lyra's core flared, the glow in her eyes snapping wide open. She moved, not with full strength, but with a speed that shocked the hunter leaning over her. Her new alloy arm, still incomplete but functional, snapped up and gripped his wrist. The metal fingers locking like a vice. The hunter tried to pull free, but she twisted sharply. The sound of metal straining filled the room. Jack used the moment of distraction to slam the plasma wrench into the second hunter's helmet. The impact left a dent and forced him to stumble back into a shelf, tools clattering to the ground. The lead hunter came at Jack again. Faster now, weapon drawn. Jack ducked under the swing and drove the wrench into the hunter's side. The hum of the tool heating the armor just enough to make the man flinch. It wasn't much, but it bought a second. And a second was enough for Lyra to shove the first hunter away from her table, sending him crashing into the wall. She stood now, unsteady but upright, her rebuilt arm flexing, the stabilizer plate under her torso glowing faintly, her eyes locked on the hunters with a sharpness Jack hadn't seen before. "You will not take me again." Her voice was still soft, but there was steel in it. The hunters regrouped, one of them tapping the side of his helmet, probably calling for backup. Jack's mind screamed at him that they needed to get out now. There was no way they could hold this place if more came. He stepped close to Lyra, keeping his wrench ready. "Can you move?" he asked. She nodded slightly, though her legs were still gone. Jack made his decision. "Then hold on," he said. He lifted her into his arms. Surprised at how light she was, even with the new parts, she wrapped her alloy arm around his neck, her grip strong enough to steady herself. The hunters moved to block the back of the workshop, but Jack was already running for the maintenance hatch. The smallest of them raised his weapon, firing a shot that scorched the wall just inches from Jack's head. He didn't stop, kicking open the hatch and slipping through into the night air. The cool mist hit his face, the smell of wet earth sharp after the metallic air inside. He didn't look back, only focused on putting distance between them and the workshop. Lyra's head rested against his shoulder, her voice quiet but certain. "You fixed me," she whispered. "Not completely," he replied, breathing hard, "but enough to fight another day." Somewhere behind them, the hunters shouted, their boots hitting the ground as they gave chase. But Jack had one advantage. They were on his scrapyard, and he knew every twisted path, every dead end, every hiding spot. He turned sharply between two piles of broken ship hulls, the shadows swallowing them. Lyra's glow was dim again, her energy nearly spent from the brief fight, but her eyes stayed locked on his face. "Why?" she asked again, the same question from earlier. Jack didn't answer this time. He just kept running. His only thought now was survival. The hunters' voices grew fainter as he wound through the maze. heading toward the old storage bunker at the far edge of the yard. It wasn't much, but it had thick walls and no power signature. The perfect place to hide for a few hours, maybe long enough to plan their next move. When they finally reached it, Jack slipped inside and closed the heavy door. Leaning against it for a moment to catch his breath, Lyra was still in his arms, lighter than she should be, but her gaze was steady. "You didn't let them take me," she said softly. "I told you," he replied. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the rain began again. A slow, steady beat against the metal roof. Inside, in the quiet dark, Jack knew this wasn't over. But for now, they were still alive. And that was enough. The bunker was dark. The only sound, the quiet hum of Lyra's core and the soft drip of not sheer of water from somewhere in the ceiling. Jack had set her down on an old storage crate, the blanket still wrapped around her. His own breathing slow but heavy after the run. Outside, the rain had grown heavier again, masking most noises, but he knew the hunters wouldn't stop searching. Not until they had her. Lyra's eyes followed him as he paced, his wrench still in his hand, his mind running through possibilities. They couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, the hunters would sweep the whole yard and find this bunker. They needed a plan. A way to make sure this ended tonight. She spoke softly, her voice steadier now. "You can leave me here, and they will follow me. You will be safe." Jack stopped and looked at her sharply. "That's not happening," he said. "We finish this together." For a moment, she seemed to study him, her gaze almost searching for something in his face. Then she gave the smallest nod. "Then you must let me fight." He frowned. "You can barely stand." But she shook her head. "My arm works. My core still has power. And I know how they move." Jack crouched beside her, his mind caught between worry and the undeniable truth she was right. If they just ran, the hunters would track them again. The only way to be free was to end the threat here. Now, he took a deep breath. "All right," he said, "but we do it my way." They moved quickly, Jack using what little equipment the bunker had left, pulling out old power cells, loose wiring, and a few pieces of scrap armor. He fitted a small shield plate to her chest to protect the exposed section near her core, then attached a second temporary stabilizer to her torso so she could balance better. While he worked, she explained what she remembered about the hunters, how they always tried to circle their target, how one distracted while the other struck from behind, how their armor had weak points at the joint lines. Jack listened carefully, storing every detail in his mind. When they were ready, they waited. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, and faintly, through the sound, came the noise they had both been listening for: footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Jack's grip on the wrench tightened. Lyra's alloy fingers flexed once, like she was testing her strength. The first shadow passed by the small window slit, then another. They were moving carefully now, searching every corner. Jack met Lyra's eyes and gave a small nod. This was it. The moment the first hunter stepped inside, Jack moved, swinging the plasma wrench hard into the man's side, the hum of the tool flaring as it connected. The hunter staggered. Lyra lunged from the crate, her alloy arm locking around his neck, twisting with inhuman strength. The sound of metal straining filled the air. The second hunter tried to raise his weapon, but Jack was already there, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and knocking him into the wall. The third came in fast, his weapon firing a short burst that grazed Jack's arm, the heat burning through his jacket. But he didn't stop. He swung the wrench again, forcing the man to step back. Lyra moved like someone who had trained all her life, each motion precise, her strikes aimed for the gaps in their armor. She wasn't as strong as she might have been with her full body, but with Jack beside her, every attack counted. The fight was fast and brutal. the sound of metal hitting metal echoing in the small bunker. Sparks flying in the dim light. Jack's breath came in hard bursts. His muscles burning, but he kept going, driven by something deeper than fear. He couldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything. Finally, with a sharp crack, the last hunter fell, his weapon clattering to the floor. The only sound left was the steady rain outside and the hiss of cooling armor. Jack stood still for a moment, his chest heaving. Then he looked at Lyra. She was leaning slightly against the wall, her glow dim but steady, her eyes fixed on him. "You gave me my life back," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the rain. "Now let me help you change the galaxy." Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, seeing not the broken figure he had found in the mud, but a fighter, someone who had been stripped down to nothing and had still refused to stop. Finally, he gave a small smile. "Then we start now," he said. They left the bunker together, the rain falling around them, the hunters lying silent behind. The night air cool and sharp with the scent of wet earth and victory. Somewhere out there, the people who had done this to her were still waiting, still hunting others like her. But now they had a problem, two of them. And neither Jack nor Lyra planned on running ever again.